So I'm going to start with one question to each of our panelists, which will be more or less the same question, just to set the scene, before we enter into a discussion about the various issues that are raised. So I'm going to start with Victoria and ask her how she sees the whole fair landscape as having changed. What are the changes she's been seeing in the last year or so?
Thanks, Georgina. So yes, I'm the Victoria that everyone's been apologising. And I wanted to say to the... No microphone?
Hold on. Yes, while we're fixing that.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So, yeah, as I was saying, I'm the Victoria that everyone's been apologising to. And, yes, I wanted to say to Tadeus, firstly, I have a great new stand at Frieze, New York for you. It's at the back by the toilets. I'm just kidding. I wanted to say, actually, that I agree. I agree with the points you're making. Art fairs do not replace galleries, and they should never be seen as a replacement for galleries. Nothing replicates the experience of seeing an exhibition in a gallery. And ideally, art fairs would be for people to go and discover artists they may not have seen before, galleries from parts of the world they haven't had the opportunity to visit, and also just to see many, many people and many works of art under the same roof. But it's a very different experience, and art fairs should be there to support galleries and not replace them. I think that's a really important point to make. So thank you for making it, and it's a good reminder to all of us. However, art fairs do serve a purpose, and it's not just about business. I think it's also about, as I said, sort of seeing all these people under one roof and seeing all this art. You can't beat seeing art in person. And you can't be talking to people in person either. And those sort of things, it's seeing and discovering works of art and having that sort of dialogue and debate with colleagues, with curators, with collectors, with galleries, with artists is something that happens very effectively and efficiently at art fairs. It changes in the last year. I mean, it's undeniable there are more fairs than there have ever been. Somebody told me 2 years ago they'd calculated around 280 fairs in the world. And this was 2 years ago. I think there are more now. And I think that this has resulted in something that affects fairs. There's a need for us to be more unique and to have a really distinct identity. It's something that Frieze has, I think, partly through the cities that we're in London and New York. Also in the curated content, our roots in editorial, in an art magazine. Things like Frieze Masters, which I started, which has quite a specific concept of presenting a contemporary view of historical art. I think if a fair doesn't have a distinctive identity, then it's going to be very hard for it to survive. Today's mentioned independent. I think you were referring to a sort of a group of like-minded galleries coming together to start a fair. Something like that again has a really clear identity, and that's really important now. I think in the sort of proliferation of art fairs. I think galleries also are becoming more and more strategic about the fairs that they choose to do. They're not just doing everything they did the year before again and again. They're really questioning the reason for them being at each fair. They're looking at the net return of each fair in terms of what they've sold, but also who they've met and how it works for their artists and their artists being happy in that context. So they're asking those questions, which is making us work harder, which is a good thing. And I see as well, I hear a lot from galleries the importance of curators at a fair. I think the curatorial presence is becoming something that's increasingly important for galleries when they're choosing which fairs to do. So it's something we work hard on, bringing museum groups and curators to the fair each year and having things like curated projects and talks and so on as well. And then I think just an interesting development that I've noticed in the last couple of years is this kind of global versus local when it comes to fairs. There are fairs that are extremely global, and I would put Frieze in those categories, partly because of the cities that they're in. They attract collectors from all over the world, from Asia, from Latin America, to the Middle East, obviously Europe and America. And that is obviously, it's a very efficient model for a gallery to sort of meet all of those people under one roof. But then also last week I was in San Francisco for the Fog Art Fair, which is a very small fair. It's only 40 galleries. And there were no collectors or curators there from overseas, but the galleries who were doing it were there to meet the curators and the collectors from San Francisco. So that has an appeal as well. So a gallery might choose to do both of those for very different reasons. And I think that's probably my 2 minutes.
I didn't have a stopwatch on you. So I'm going to now move to Elba. So firstly, how many fairs a year do you do? Are you planning this year? And the same question, what changes have you seen in the last year?
This year I will do 6 fairs, but I have done 8 fairs a year sometimes. And not having also any associate director, and also not having any branch in another country. But enough to see what the change have been, and I can summarize it in 4 new situation I have observed. One, the first one is galleries. There is a tendency in galleries of abandoning to reproduce at the fair the white cube situation in favor of a more red carpet presentation, it's the moment to make a mise en scène. I don't speak French, but a theatrical presentation. And so I have seen this at Frieze in London, so for a quite group of galleries. Another change is there are more curated programs offered by the art fairs, which means that they also would like to include not only new galleries but also established ones which are not participated, but is a means to attract them and to offer to a new clientele this kind of programs. Also, I have to, in the last year, ephemeral art have taken also a place, an important space in at the art fairs, and it has not replaced the objectual art, but at least it has a more visibility and it has a protagonism. And last but not least, I have seen that as a reflection of what is going on in economy also, and the art fairs and society is a good universe where you can see this. The gap between wealthy galleries and more modest ones is bigger. I think the business and profit is much more concentrated in a few groups of galleries than in earlier years.
Very
and
interesting.
I'm sure during the discussion we will find another difference which had been happening in the last year or before.
Thank you. And Jean, so how many art fairs does Lelong do in a year?
I don't know exactly, but probably eight or nine. I mean, most of them. Since we have 2 branches, Paris and New York, and we used to have Zurich until a few years. I don't go to all of them. For instance, I mean, we can at least we can separate and do more fairs with by sending different teams. There's been many changes, not in a very recent year, not this last year, but over the last 30, 40 years. As Tadeusz mentioned, for instance, Cologne used to be a very important art fair, and it's not really anymore. It has faded. Chicago was a very important art fair, and it somehow disappeared.
Yeah.
And we tried with several other galleries to see if it would work again. It doesn't. So there are cycles. There probably are cycles in everything. I would not say that Art Basel, for instance, has suffered cycles. So the difference, nor Miami, Basel and Miami, the difference is probably that in the last 10 years, 15 years, everything has been thought more seriously, more profoundly by the fair organizers, but also by the galleries. It has become, I mean, the issue is more important, and everybody prepares things more carefully. It's
So increased
clearly-
professionalization.
I think so.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. That's
You know, we certainly think much more than before what we should bring in this place, or why or not. You know, not only because it will work. We need also to bring things in places where we think it will not work or may not work, but we just need to try. I mean, it's too easy to bring what you know you can sell, because what you can sell, you will sell it anyway. You know, here or there. So this is not the real issue. It's more important to know how to promote other places, other artists in new places. I mean, there's another issue that I found interesting, that what art fair bring to a gallery. It's also a way to look at the program in a different way. The gallery program is extremely important, but in an art fair, in a gallery, usually you do one-person shows. In an art fair, you may do one-person show, but rarely you select from your program. We all know that there are artists who you love, but they are very hard to install with others. It doesn't work together. You know, it just doesn't work. And it ruins the booth. So we have to find ways. We have to find, maybe work on the architecture of the booth, to find ways to make it work. So it's a way to look at your own program in a different way. This doesn't happen to galleries who have a very strict aesthetic. You know, some do. But it's not our case. It's not the case of Tadeusz, who was here, for instance. So I'm sure he's confronted to the same problem. You know, there are artists who don't work with the others visually. So.
Excellent. So I'd like to pick up firstly on one of the questions that I had already submitted to you as a possibility, which is very links in to what Elba said. My question was, are we moving towards a sort of corporatization, you know, with the groups? So Frieze now has 3, Basel, as we know, has 3. MCH, which is the parent company of Basel, is forming a group of regional fairs, so that's another group of fairs. But also, Elba said that one of the things she's noticed is that this sort of polarization, in a way, this gap between the very big galleries and the smaller galleries. So perhaps you could comment on, perhaps Victoria start by talking about the groups, but comment on this question of sort of a polarization or a gap between the big and the smaller, and what it means.
I think it's. I think Elba's point is really important. Can you now hear through this microphone?
Yes.
Great. I think it's more significant with the galleries than the fairs in terms of the polarization between the biggest galleries who have branches all over the world and the smallest galleries who are young galleries just starting with one space, and who, if they have a bad month or a bad fair, it's very significant in terms of the future of their business. And this, for a fair like Frieze, we have both of those galleries under one roof. So the question we think about a lot is, how do we make the fair work for both of them? And how do we make it fair, being the word I'm always using, for both, for both Gagosian and a young gallery from the Lower East Side. And so, fairs generally charge per square meter for a booth. We do the same, but for example, at Frieze New York, the frame section, which is for young galleries under 8 years old, who are doing making a solo presentation of one artist, the booth price is 50% less per square meter than the bigger galleries are paying. So you have to make those kind of discrepancies to support galleries at that stage in their development. Otherwise, I think we need to keep reminding ourselves they are the galleries of the future. They're the big galleries of the future. And so if they're not able to be part of the system, if they're not able to participate in fairs at that stage, then they may never get to that that stage of growth. So I think about it a lot in terms of the galleries, less so with the fairs because, as you say, there are 2 fair groups with 3 fairs each, and then lots of other sort of big fairs, and then some smaller fairs. The polarization doesn't seem quite as pronounced with the fairs to me as it does with the galleries.
Is it a trend, though, polarizing? I mean, the formation of bigger groups, do you think there will be other groups formed, or do you think these are...
Of fairs?
Yes, that Basel, Frieze and...
I mean, even Independent has a fair in Brussels
yes,
as well, so
yes.
they're a group too, in a way. Or something like NADA does more than one art fair, or, so there are fairs that are for young galleries that are very different from a group like Frieze or Basel, but they're still doing more than one art fair. Untitled, for example, which had a fair last week in San Francisco. They're also in Miami and New York. So I think there's an efficiency to it, I suppose. And I would say, as a fair director, that every fair that I do, I learn something new from. And so, doing 3 a year for me is more helpful than doing 1 a year, because I'm kind of hoping it's getting better every time, basically, because, you're learning more about galleries, you're having a more regular check-in with how things are going, with the galleries, with the collectors, with the fairs, and so on. So yeah, I think it helps us improve doing more of them, I guess.
I have a question connected also with the corporatization of not only galleries but also fairs. What means this new partnership of Frieze with WME, this Hollywood agency?
It's a good question.
Yes.
I mean, Frieze has been quite unique in the past.
I mean, in the sense that will it have a reflection on the
and I would say,
fair?
in short, no. But as a longer answer,
yes.
Frieze was unique in the past as being one of the only big fairs that wasn't owned by a big company. The Basel fairs are owned by MCH,
Yes.
big events company. FIAC is owned by Reed Exposition, so a big company. So Frieze being owned just by 2 people who started with an art magazine was actually really unusual. Yes. And what we'd found as well is that it meant that we were in a bit of a more difficult situation than them in terms of resources and ability to grow things like digital or whatever it was that we wanted to do for galleries. And so the WME IMG is a relationship. It's a partnership essentially, and they've made an investment. So they don't fully own Frieze and they don't control Frieze. So Matthew and Amanda, who founded it, still have total control over the company. They're not really interested in getting involved in the day-to-day running of it, but where they can help us is with things like sponsorship. They actually sponsored the Tate Fund at Frieze London this year, so they enabled the Tate to come and buy works at the fair before anyone else came in. And they're helping us increase our sponsorship revenue, which helps us, for example, at Frieze New York, we've just reduced the costs of participation for the galleries. So we've made the rent less expensive. We've made all the extras, like walls and floors and lights, less expensive. So that's what we were hoping for, and that's what's now beginning to happen. But that, in an ideal world, that's the only difference the galleries should see with their partnership with Frieze is, that they should see that those sort of cost reduction benefits rather than anything else. Corporatization is something we are definitely staying far away from.
And Jean, have you anything to add to the debate about the polarization between the bigger galleries?
Now, there is clearly a concentration, yes. You can see that, it's obvious, at every level, not only between fairs, between galleries, and on a smaller number of artists also. This is, I don't know if it is an effect of the ways of communication, of internet. It's possible. But there's always room.
Yes.
There's always room. There's always room for a new artist. And they always come from nowhere. You don't know, before in advance. It's not a mold. Things don't come from a mold, come out of the mold. And so we have to do with it. There is a concentration, it's clear. Maybe I can imagine that for an art fair as well as for a gallery, you have to, in order to be efficient, you have to reach a sort of critical size, like it's a matter of scale at some point to be visible. That's it. But
so one of the criticism, this is really a question, well, for all three of you, is having to participate in so many art fairs, putting a huge amount of pressure, both financially and in manpower, in time, attention, on galleries, because there is this feeling that you have to be seen at, whether it's Frieze or Basel. Is this pressure growing? Is it problematic for galleries?
I think.
Or can you step away?
I'm sorry, excuse me. I think it's more problematic for some galleries than from others. We obviously know that there are galleries. The fairs need some group of galleries, and of course they have to do their job, but also it's a guarantee for the fair. And there is a huge amount of galleries who have a lot of pressure, not only to present strong proposal for their booth, but also because they have to be in an international event because of the limits of their national market, as it happens here in Spain. Because the artists also make a lot of pressure on them. They want visibility and the most. And also because even the clients, the clients likes to see the galleries in their best fair of the moment, because it's a guarantee of professionalism.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but not too much. So it's necessary pressure.
I think there is a pressure. Yes, it's crucial for galleries to be allowed to be accepted in a fair. It's crucial to be in a good spot.
Yes. Once in,
you certainly feel the pressure of the committees. I must say, we don't feel totally free. We always think that the committees are expecting something. Of course, they're expecting for us to be the best, but what does it mean? It means we have to cope with their expectations, first to understand them and then to cope with it. It means it's harder to try something different, to try something new, to take risks.
yes.
We don't take risks. That's the thing. Less and less. This is part of the concentration. We take less and less risk.
Really?
Because it's too dangerous.
But you don't
know.
take risk because you think that's not what the fair and the committees want to see, or because it's too much risk for the business?
It's not. In my case, there's no risk for the business. So there's no financial pressure. We make money on each fair. So each fair, it doesn't cost, it brings.
Yes.
Okay? So there's no pressure on that side. I understand it may happen for other galleries, but
Yes.
it's not our case. So we would be able to take more risk. I would love to do it. But the risk is not to be, well, not to keep the
Profit.
place.
Yes.
It's interesting to hear that, because I feel like we've always tried to encourage galleries to take risks with their presentation,
Yes.
in terms of doing something that's less kind of commercially formulaic, or just that's something that's safe, because the fair becomes more interesting if galleries
No,
take
of course.
risks.
But as always, a risk, you win or you fail.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's why, But that's why when it
No,
comes
no,
to pressure, I feel like it may be irresponsible of us to put pressure on galleries to take risks with their presentation, because if it doesn't sell, it's such a significant loss for people that it's that's where we always try to balance out how much we should encourage risk-taking.
Again, I'd like to point out that, at least in my case, the problem is not whether we sell or not. I'm not calling a failure if we don't sell. I'm happy to take that risk.
Right.
What I'm anxious about is to take a risk and people would say, we don't like what you did.
Yeah.
I don't care. Selling or not selling is my problem.
Yeah, but
And
it should
that I
still
can
be
afford.
an acknowledgement that you tried to do something different, and I think that's something that I'd like to think Frieze encourages, and I would imagine other fairs might. So let's talk.
I think, I mean, talking about fairs, Frieze is one of the fairs where more galleries take risk, I think.
Probably. Yeah.
Yes, and most
say so.
the galleries which take risk, most of them are young galleries,
Yeah.
and of course, it's a real risk. But also, modest galleries have a gap where they
Exactly.
can be successful, but they need this kind of good luck. So the risk is real, no? And they can make it,
Yeah.
you know.
But the risk as well, I think, is often, not. I mentioned earlier that the importance of a curatorial presence at fairs and the importance of galleries showing their artists at their best to curators, which then leads to museum shows. And often that comes out of more ambitious, risky presentations, because if it is something that's quite sort of commercial and formulaic, it might be less interesting for curators to pick up on. And I think you're right, Elba, a lot of galleries at Frieze do more risky presentations, and I think it's partly a response to the curatorial presence there and them feeling that that's where their artists are going to be noticed.
Yes.
But it does, for me at least, makes the fair a much more interesting experience when they do. Again, I said it's the sort of balance. I wouldn't want to, with a young gallery, push them into taking a risk if I felt that they might then lose a lot of money, because it could then be very significant to them. So tricky balance.
So I'd like to move on to something else which is very much happening today, is the issue of galleries who don't have a plate glass window on the ground floor, and who as a result may not be accepted into art fairs. This is very much the trend. So many galleries have had to close because the foot traffic in galleries is reducing all the time. Somebody here was just saying to me there are fewer and fewer people who go into galleries. So why keep an expensive gallery when you're doing 6 or 8 fairs a year? But on the other hand, the art fairs accept. So do you think this will be modified? Do you think that there will be a move towards accepting dealers who don't have much in the way of a real-world presence?
I think it would be a bit of a dangerous path to go down, and for the reason I come back to Tadeus's point about the importance of gallery exhibitions. If a gallery is, and I would separate this into two conversations. If we're talking about contemporary art, if a gallery is representing artists, and the only place that they're really showing those artists is at art fairs, there's something wrong with that system. They need to be doing great exhibitions of those artists in their galleries. It's about exhibition making, and I think I totally sympathise with this situation of rents being high and so on. But actually, when, like in the earlier days of Frieze, we had galleries like Curimanzito from Mexico City who didn't have a space. They were kind of itinerant and did exhibitions in different places before they opened their current gallery. We had Hotel Gallery from London, which no longer exists, but their gallery was kind of their spare room in their apartment. I mean, it doesn't have to be plate glass ground floor in Mayfair. It can, as long as there is somewhere where you're making exhibitions and showing your artists in the context that they have chosen. So I think that's with contemporary galleries. I think if their only existence was through art fairs, there would be a problem with that system, and that was something we would need to address and figure out why we were getting to that point. However, my background was previously in Frieze Masters, and in the secondary market, there are many galleries who don't have a real world presence because they're not representing artists, they're showing secondary market work, they're more dealers, I suppose, and it's less necessary for them to have a bricks and mortar space, and many of them just have an office, and And the interesting thing I found there was the perception that you can create as a gallery by doing fairs. And this applies to contemporary galleries as well. Your gallery could be the spare bedroom of your apartment, but if you take a decent sized stand at a few art fairs, people will just think you've got a big gallery somewhere. But sometimes I've visited cities and gone to see people in their gallery and thought, wow, that's not what I expected at all, because you've become used to seeing them, in different parts of the world. So yes, in the secondary market, I would say it is a different situation, and much less necessary to have that kind of real world presence, as you call it. And then the third thing I was thinking of is whether if there's just showing digital art, for example, if a gallery is specialising in something like that. But I haven't come across that as a situation. But if they're showing artists who really don't require a white cube type space, then it's different again. But maybe we'll get to that at some point in the future.
This is really, in a way, for the two gallerists. Are there changes that you'd like to see in the fair landscape? What would you like to see changed? What would
I would like to add something about the real world
Please.
gallery, if it is necessary.
Of course.
I completely agree with Tadeusz Ropak about having a gallery construct, and to construct an identity as a gallery is only possible if you have a real world gallery. And if you think that you are an agent of who is creating contemporary culture, you have to be attached to a community. You have to try to influence in that community in their visual education. And also, if you work with artists who are in the first stage of their career, they need a place to give them visibility. Perhaps it's the first step before they go to an institution or to other places. So I think it's more necessary than ever, and I believe it has not to be a big space. So this is conforms also your own image, your own identity. If you choose the neighborhood, the kind of a space you want to deal with. So I think is. We always think because internet and the informatic world we are living, who are very good tools for us, that will transform completely what we already have constructed. But I think there are some issues that will remain.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, absolutely. It's clear.
Yes.
I mean, what you said the main difference is clearly between secondary market and galleries who represent artists. Those need a space. I mean, it's their identity.
Yes.
Of course, for secondary market, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
It can be, that's a different thing. I don't think fairs can change their policy on that. I mean, it seems impossible.
Yeah. And as I said, to do so would suggest that we don't think galleries need to do exhibitions,
Yeah.
which would be, and it's not, not the truth at all.
So to continue on, my next question, which is, are there some changes you'd like to see in the fair landscape? What would make life easier for you as far as working with fairs, just selecting fairs?
Well,
Oh no, I'm not complaining.
no, I think I agree with you that it has been a great professionalization of the fairs, of the galleries. Everyone have helped to do it and to make a big offer. What I miss is a more transparency in terms of financial results from the fairs. That's it. I miss it, and not because I am curious about this. Because of course you read on the first on the following day of the opening, big sales here and there, and you read this immediately from Art News and all these digital online newspaper. But I think this is an important information. I come from the sociology, so this could give you a overview how the world of art, the economy moves, where it is concentrated, what kind of works are sold at art fairs, because I have an idea, but this is an intuition. I think that the big sales and the big numbers are made by painting, as it happens always. So this is interesting to see how, you know, the behavior of our clientele.
So you mean the economy in terms of what people are buying at any given moment, and the transparency around
Yes, I
what's
think
actually selling at the fairs, who's selling?
Because, you know, sometimes there are contradictions between the official news and what you have around your the area where you are from your neighbors.
But the other thing I would say,
Gallery.
Elba, is I would be fascinated to see that as well.
Yes.
I often don't know, because the galleries are not obliged to tell me what they're selling.
Of course.
And so more often than not, you know, some galleries are very open and they'll say, we've done really well, we've sold everything.
Yeah.
Some people say that every time, and you think,
Yes.
is that always true?
Yes, yes.
And then others...
No, I understand.
And then, you know, and then some will just say, every time I ask them, they'll just say, fine. It's fine. And fine could mean we've sold everything or we've sold nothing. And it really... So, and then we do we send a survey to all galleries, and we ask
Yes.
galleries to tell us how many they sold, at what value, whether they're seeing work selling in this kind of price bracket, this kind of price bracket. We get about, you know, like around a 50% return rate on the surveys. Not everybody answers that question. And so it's very difficult to build up that picture. And I think it's just, it's the way fairs have been set up is to basically we rent the space to the galleries, and then it's their business. It's private, and it's something that they can share if they want to, but there's no obligation. So I agree with you. It would be great to have that full transparency. But we're not holding any information back. We don't have it either.
But sales is not the only criteria either.
It's not. You're absolutely right.
I mean, for instance, I have a precise example in mind at Frieze. 2 or 3 years ago, I don't remember exactly when, I remember Nushin Galerie from New York had done a fantastic exhibition of David Smith.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
At Frieze Masters.
They didn't sell anything, they told me. Well, good, but I remember that show.
Yeah.
You know, it was a great show.
They made a statement.
It was very, very well done, beautiful. Okay, they didn't sell, fine. And they didn't die, you know,
Yes. Yes.
for that.
That's still fine.
But they have
So
big resources.
is it a failure? It's a failure not to sell. But it's not a failure if you have an exhibition which is acclaimed, which is
Yes.
seen as beautiful.
And then last
They
year at Frieze
succeeded in
Masters,
something, in doing something.
they did a group stand of different works, and they sold very well. But again, it comes back to risk taking. With the
Yeah.
David
Yes.
Smith show, they took a risk. They didn't sell, but they did something memorable.
Exactly.
This year, they did a group stand. They did much better commercially, but you know, you
Yes.
might not
So
remember
you
what it
have
was. So
to-
it's like,
you
yeah,
have
Yes.
to
Yeah.
balance.
there's always a benefit
But,
of doing something like that if you can afford
I
to.
mean, what comes out of your presentation is important not only in terms of sales, really.
Yes.
I mean, it gives an image for 1 year
Yes.
to an audience. It's more important than sales, as long as
But you have to
sales
be able to support it.
No,
I mean,
of course.
Nuchin
No.
Gallery has huge resources
agree.
behind it. A small
No,
gallery
but
that
that's
invests a lot
obvious.
in a fair and brings everything home. That's tough. So
You have to make it work one way or another.
Yes,
Yes.
it's got to.
I think 19% of the galleries who goes to fairs, you are talking to the right person that think that sale is not the only thing important in a gallery's activity. But I can tell you that 90% of the galleries without distinction that goes to fair, they want to sell.
No, of course.
Of
we all
course,
want
yeah.
to.
And this is
They
an
all want to sell,
important
for sure.
this is an important issue.
I would say
Or
100%.
if
I'll
not
tell
the
you
most,
something else.
if not the most important one.
No, but the goal, we all want to sell, but we want, at least in my view, I want to sell mostly what is the most difficult to sell, not what is the easiest to sell. I mean, what is easy to sell, okay, I don't need...
Yes.
You don't have to go to a fair.
To convince people is to sell what is hard to sell.
Yes.
And I think there's another step to that, which is, and I hear this from galleries regularly, that at fairs they want to sell to new clients, not to their existing clients, because their
Of
existing
course.
clients they could have maybe sold to at the gallery, whereas if these are new people that they've never met before, who've never been inside their gallery, that makes the trip to the fair very worthwhile, because you might continue to work with that person for the next 10 years.
Well, we're going to open up to questions in a little while, but I've got one last question for each of you, which is the same one. Can you give me predictions about how you think the fair landscape will evolve in the will we see, there's been this explosion of fairs, will we see fewer fairs? Will we see more of a split between what Victoria was saying, the big groups and then the more local ones? What do you think? Perhaps we should start with you, because that's your job to be watching.
I think, coming back to what I was saying at the beginning, I think fairs are going to have to work harder for galleries, and make sure that they can absolutely, the gallery, when they're looking at what they do in a year, can absolutely justify going to that fair. And that means not only the costs of exhibiting, but also the fact that all of their staff are there. It means not being in the gallery for a week. It means maybe being away from your family for a week. It has all of that makes, it then is worth that investment. And so this is something that we're thinking about all the time, is how do we keep improving the fairs for galleries. And in London we brought back the Tate Fund this year, I mentioned, also a new fund with the Contemporary Art Society. We have stand prizes for galleries who do ambitious presentations and take risks. Frieze New York, we're making it 4 days long instead of 5, so galleries are out of their space for less time and with the same results, making it less expensive with all the sort of extras costs that we're cutting. And so all these sorts of things, making it much cheaper for young galleries, giving them very specific support. It didn't used to be quite such hard work, to be honest. It was more, when there were far fewer fairs, I think Frieze was it was just a very obvious choice. And I think when now there are many more for people to choose from, we have to really make the effort, really make sure they're working for galleries, which is good. That's as it should be. It should be kind of competitive for us as well as for the galleries who want to be in it. It's a good thing, healthy competition. And I think also the sort of diversity of work you see at fairs as well, I think is something that that we've seen through the kind of interest in Frieze Masters from a contemporary audience as well as historical art audience. And actually at Frieze New York this year we're introducing more 20th century art galleries and actually a couple of tribal art galleries as well. Again, sort of contextualize the contemporary art and just make it a more diverse and interesting experience and add new layers of discovery for the people who are coming there.
Jean, how do you think? Well,
I think the concentration might go on, but on the other end, there might be. I mean, there is already a place for fairs where I don't know what word I could use, like a niche. For instance, there are already a fair which is specialized in African art, or this may increase. I mean, there are other. Things which I'm sure we will see a fair in Africa soon.
Yes.
Whether it will be in
I think Turia is working. She was working on it. Yes.
So things keep evolving. There will be, and there's certainly room for specialized art.
Yes.
There, and on smaller instead of. I mean, not instead, but next to the bigger ones. Yeah, I think we'll see that more and more.
And Elba?
Yes, I think so. I agree. But I think that many of the fairs that today are operating, they will disappear.
Really?
And they in that direction.
You mean the niche fairs?
I mean the general fair on contemporary that there are so many. Not the big ones, but the big offer that we have. Some of them, they will disappear. Yes.
Probably they should.
Yes, I think so. I don't want to name it.
Well, we've seen one or two disappear. Because although coming back, they always say they're going to come back. Yes. But when they close, you never know if that's face-saving. Right, I'm going to open up to questions. As again, could you please give your name? There's a question over there. And please wait for the microphone. So there's a question here.
Hi, Lisa Schiff again, sorry. I just wanted to comment a little bit and maybe get feedback. So again, working as an art advisor and kind of coming up with the whole contemporary art fair scene, which has really exploded, and finding right now that I hate them so much, and I love them, and they're necessary. Sorry, Victoria. They're great for. I can see Tadeus, and I don't get to see him that often, so I can say hi to people and do business in that way and just keep relations up. But from an actual collecting point of view, it's really hard to go through with collectors to these fairs and advise them correctly on the spot. I don't like for them to buy things at fairs. We always buy things at fairs, so I make lots of money at fairs. But we have much richer experiences when we go and do galleries, which we do less and less. And I think part of the problem is the saturation level of fairs, auctions, openings, galleries that have 10 outposts in their openings. And as someone whose job used to be to know every single thing that was happening globally in the art world, I now literally cannot, even with a staff of people helping me, but actually I'm trying to close it down for them. I feel like my job has now become narrowing it as much as I possibly can. And I find my clients burned out and a little depressed and not excited. And that is really scary to see this. Even sometimes I feel like that. When I go in, I'm like, oh, there's another this, there's another that. And there's like a lot of too muchness and surplus, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Ooh.
I don't understand the question.
I mean, I would say in one sense, you're right that the art world continues to grow. But it's partly because it grows globally as well and in different parts of the world. The gallery that won the Stand Prize at Frieze London this year is from Guatemala. It's the first time we've had a gallery from Guatemala in the fair, and they did this amazing presentation. But it does continue to grow. Every year, the fairs become more global in terms of the galleries that are participating, but also the people that are visiting. And I can't help but see this as a positive thing. There is more art in the world. There's more art in different parts of the world, and we're getting to see it. It's kind of amazing. I take your point, though, that to try and get your head around all of that is impossible. And I think that our jobs as fair directors, but as art advisors, as gallery owners, anybody who's working with a collector, curators do this too, of course, is to edit. Art magazine editors do it, obviously, but it's just to edit this and to try and, it's our jobs to be looking at art all the time and kind of figuring out what's good and presenting that to, for you to sort of present that to your clients and make sure that they're not seeing too much that's not good, because that's when it does get overwhelming and depressing. And fairs, I guess, are part of that. It's an edit of the many hundreds of galleries that even apply to be in a fair. It's, we're sort of cutting it down to these are the ones that we think are good right now. So it's an overwhelming amount of information, but I feel like without these kind of edited structures, it could be even more overwhelming without art magazines and galleries and fairs and museums kind of doing that work.
We have a question here in the front, please.
Hi, Linda Blumberg, and I'm the executive director of the Art Dealers Association. And we have a fair in New York, as you know. This is going to be the 29th year of our fair. And I guess you could call it a boutique fair. I think that's true. Here's what I worry about, and I wonder what you think about it. I think somebody said that fairs go in cycles, and I think that's actually true. And I think that we saw it this year in Basel, in Miami, for a lot of reasons. I think there was fair fatigue in the sense there was disease, worry, there were all kinds of issues. The American presidential election certainly affected it. But I think what happened was that it gained a reputation, and for once I'm not apologizing to you, Victoria, as a party place, a frenzy, and serious people and a lot of collectors were just tired and didn't want to go. And what the challenge is, and what I'm curious about, is how do we deal with that? You run the risk of same old, same old. You mentioned taking risks. If our fair is only open to our members, so we're not international, we're national. and we have limited space. But nevertheless, how do we make it fresh every year? How do we cope with fatigue? Seen it, done it, been there. How many dinners can I go to? How many parties can I go to? How many unique kinds of attention-getting exhibitionists at a fair? And when do we get down to the serious business of connoisseurship and the opportunity to really have that experience? So I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I loved your fair. I loved the ADA fair. It's a wonderful place. I was heard.
I think it was. I think we've picked that
No,
one up.
it's an excellent example of a different kind of fair, which works perfectly. I think it's a very good combination. It doesn't look like any other fair.
Yeah.
It's very, very different. It's small. People like it. It's convenient. It's in the middle of the city. It's easy. And the level of quality is excellent, although you accept, I don't know exactly, but more or less all members. I don't know if there's...
No,
there's not all.
hardly.
Okay.
No, I wish it were that easy.
No, that would be too
It's
many.
not,
life
it's not
would
big
be
enough.
easier.
Yeah.
No, we members have to apply to our fair, and we have a fair committee that scrutinizes the proposals, and very much they're based on the proposals themselves, and it can't be same old, same old. Occasionally, some people feel they can do that. They can just say the best of my gallery, and more we say we're awfully sorry, but it just won't. That's not acceptable. But it is a struggle to maintain freshness with intimacy and the possibility to speak with the dealers themselves and understand what you're looking at. And that's really key.
Can I say something just
Yes,
on this point? 'Cause I
absolutely.
think the point you're making is quite similar to Lisa's in a way. It's about people being burnt out by seeing too many things and all of the froth that goes on around it as well. And I think perhaps the danger is sort of encouraging everybody to try to see everything, because it does become too much. And I think something that would help the situation is that there are more and more galleries opening all the time, and as a result there are more and more fairs. There are more and more artists making work. The number of collectors needs to grow at the same pace. Otherwise you're asking the same small pool of collectors to visit more galleries, more fairs, buy more art. And so that, I think, is something that it's something we think about a lot, and I'm not sure we've cracked the formula for it, but sort of there's a lot of people in the world. There are a lot of people in the world with money who don't necessarily buy art yet. But I think that's that would help with this in a way, if there were more collectors being generated at the same pace, so that there wasn't this kind of pressure on everybody to go to every fair and go to every gallery and see every artist, and and then you have the connoisseurship, I guess, but
I'm going to move
Spread
on
out.
to another question, which is just here.
My name is Mahati Mulebati, and I'm from Johannesburg. You mentioned Turia, and thank you that Turia 154 and Turia has brought attention and focus to artists from Africa. But we do have an art fair, which will be 10 years in Johannesburg, Joburg Art Fair, and then the Cape Town Art Fair. And when we look around, we find that the Amory last year and at Paris, they're looking at focus on Africa. And I'm interested to know whether you would go that way, even though there is 154 in London. Would you? What do you think of that? Of fairs looking at ring fencing artists or art galleries from Africa and saying focus on that? Is that something that you'd be looking at, or?
You mean having a regional focus?
Yes.
As the
yes,
Armory
yeah,
did? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's not something we've ever done at Frieze to focus on one part of the world, but we've always tried to bring as many parts of the world into the fair as possible and give them all the same platform. And we have Michael Stevenson and Goodman Gallery from South Africa have been in the fairs for some time. October Gallery are joining Frieze New York this year as well, who've done the African Art Fair for a while. So it's, that kind of global diversity is really important within the fair, but we try to kind of spread it evenly rather than highlighting one area each time, I guess, which is a different approach, but it kind of gives, I hope, a more balanced profile to each part of the world every year. But it is something that's really interesting. I mean, I think the more we're seeing, the fact that there's an entire continent that's only represented by 2 or 3 galleries in a major fair is kind of unusual in itself. So the more we're seeing of that, the better.
But Arco in Madrid has a guest country every year, a different one. So they do that. So it's not the same, but it's every year different, but they do it.
Yeah.
But the Armory is abandoning that. So they've stopped doing that. So it depends. Next question. I have a striped arm. Sorry, but I couldn't see your face. I could see the arm here. Oh, sorry. You had it. Simon, go ahead, and then we'll take the one there.
No, I have one question to Victoria. We were speaking about the growth of the market and the growth of the participants, because what was interesting in Tadeusz Ropak's speech is that while a lot of things have changed, more things have not changed, I think, over the years, especially for people who have been around for a little while. You feel that essentially it hasn't changed as much as one think it might. And I feel the art world is still infinitesimally small, and we are all part of a traveling circus that travel every day to a different place. And who do we meet? All the same people that we meet everywhere. So we are a small microcosm who live, who move from place to place. And so my question is, do you have information on how many individual collectors or buyers buy in a year at Frieze collectively? So how many different buyers do you have? Because I think that auction houses, I was told, and I don't know, my colleague sitting here, Martin Klosterfelder, would know the answer. I was told that last year at Sotheby's, there were only 25,000 different purchases across all categories, across all 88 categories, which shows, you would think, for a company like Sotheby's or Christie's, who dominate the public side of the market, you would think that it would be a much, much bigger number of individual players. So you see that, in fact, at the end of the day, it's an infinitesimally small number of people who make the market. And then, of course, as we all know, if you then look at the top of the pyramid for the auction houses, your number becomes very, very small indeed to see who are the ones that make all the difference in terms of your success and profitability.
I think it's a very good point, and you're right, and it's the similar point I was just making when we were discussing. The idea is that there need to be more of them, ideally, and I know it's something the auction houses actively work on all the time, is generating new buyers, new collectors, especially in places like China, where there seems to be that potential for growth. We do measure that the attendance of collectors. We have, as you know, VIP cards that people receive, and we scan them so we know who's visiting, and we know where they're from in the world, and so on. We have, every year we get more VIPs coming to our fair every year, and there are new ones every year, new ones. But whether that is growing in proportion, with the same rate of growth as the galleries and the fairs, that I don't know, and that I think is something that is sort of necessary, is that sort of nurturing and education of collectors or people who are not yet collectors to sort of step up and begin. And we launched something in London recently called Frieze Academy, which is sort of different educational strands, some of them more academic about art criticism and so on, but we have one that's specifically about collecting, and it's to encourage people who might be thinking about it but don't know quite where to start to actually make that step and start buying art. Because if without that, as you say, without that kind of that area of that group of people growing as well, there's nothing to underpin it all. So it is really important, and I think it's not something that is sort of actively happening in that many ways. So definitely something we think about a lot, because we invite the same people to many, many different things. Again, back to Lisa's point, they're sort of bombarded with invitations and encouragement to attend certain events. So the more there are of them, the better.
Victoria, do we know how many VIP cards are? I know you know.
How many
Is it
cards?
something you would be prepared to share with us?
I mean, it's how many are used? You mean at a fair?
No, how many people are on your VIP list? So.
Oh, it's thousands. I mean, many, many thousands. But that's been built over many years. Most of that's come from the galleries themselves who nominate VIPs, but it's also come from sponsors. It's come from museum groups. It's a big list. And the attendance is not, there's no way we would get everybody we invite coming to the fair. It's actually kind of a small proportion of that. So you have to know maybe 10,000 people to get 5,000 people, or whatever it is. You need to invite an awful lot of people to get a good attendance.
So we had the lady here. Sorry, with the striped sweater. She's been waiting patiently.
Right. My name is Aslı Sümer. I'm a gallerist from Istanbul. What I wanted to ask is this 8-year, for younger galleries. But I always feel like being a 5-year-old gallery in London or New York versus some other part of the world is quite different. And I find this very challenging because every time I look at the fairs, I'm either too old for them, or either they're very expensive. So I wanted to get your opinion on this, if you find this limiting or not.
So we have Frieze New York is the next fair coming up. So we have the frame section that I mentioned. It's for galleries under 8 years old, and to do solo exhibitions, and that's 50% less expensive than per square meter than the main section. And then we have the focus section, which is for galleries under 12 years old. That is 30% less expensive than the main section, and they can show whatever they want, and it's kind of integrated into the fair. And then the main section. So we have this kind of rungs that galleries can step up, essentially. But our aim is that everybody, it should be a step into the main section, that everybody, when they get to that point, can be part of the main section of the fair and be competing on the same level. I know that it's still, for some people, like coming from the main section, coming from the young sections of the main section can still be too much of a jump. And it's a difficult one to address. We have these 3 layers. How much further can we go, I guess? And then I guess once, when people apply for the main section, there are different sizes of stand, and that obviously radically affects the price. So we do, we try and make it kind of as easy as possible for people to do, but I realise it's not a perfect structure. But I mean, if there are things we can do better that would help people at different stages of their career, I'd be totally open to hearing them. Be really interested to hear them.
So we have a question over here, and then one there, and another one there.
Is it mine now? Okay. Hello, thank you very much. My name's Tasneem Salam, and I have a gallery called Tasneem Gallery here in Barcelona. And I have one comment and one question, if I may. I do agree very much that we do need to develop the collector base, and that's something that really can only happen at the gallery level. And just in terms of marketing from your fair perspective, I just know that a lot of my collectors are not really interested in being called VIPs. It's not something that fascinates them. So this whole VIP aspect is not of interest. But my question is that in addition, well, that's mine, so it might be different for other people. But in addition to this sort of evolving fair situation that we've had in the last 10 or more years, what we also have is this evolving biennale situation. There seems to be more and more of that happening. And that's something for me as a gallerist that I'm really very interested in, and I work very hard to get my artists into biennales. And I don't know if it's something that, as people involved in art fairs that you're thinking about. What is the sort of relationship between art fairs and biennales and galleries?
Interesting question, thank you. I don't know, perhaps the galleries should start by...
You're totally right. This is something which leads to another point, really, which we've seen also in many art fairs, where there is more and more an incentive to curate the presentation from outside the gallery. There's curators who do things. So art fairs are commercial venues, but the curating side is entering that. But the other way around is the same. In biennales, like in Venice, you see that the power of trade is entering the event, which was supposed to be only a curated event. So there's the two forces are mixing, really. I don't think I like it in both ways. But it's a fact. It's clearly, what do you think?
Yeah.
I heard from a gallery during the last Venice Biennale that that they were really excited when their artist was invited to participate, but they were then asked to pay 100% of the production cost of the work and 100% of the shipping costs.
Exactly.
And so you then have to sell. The pressure is there to sell the work because, but obviously there is a really clear distinction between fairs and biennials, and one is curated by curators, the other is a selection of galleries who will then show what they want, and it's very transparently work for sale. Whereas I think with biennales, it is something different. It's a very different experience, and I personally love visiting them as well. But it is. I think the funding situation of biennials means that a lot of it is then passed back to galleries, and inevitably then a commercial aspect has to come into it. It's very difficult to avoid because there's just those costs have got to be covered. I just wanted to mention the term VIPs. I hate it too. I wish someone would come up with something better. And we're actually doing away with the VIP room at Frieze this year because I just think the sort of the idea of VIP room and the name of it is slightly unappealing. So we're using it for talks instead. So yes, thoughts on a postcard, welcome.
So we have one here and then one there. Yes.
Okay, so hello. My name is Isabel Lesmeister. I'm from Germany. I have a very small gallery running in Regensburg, which is a place which is even smaller than Salzburg, and it's in Loth, Bavaria, and nobody knows it. So I totally agree with you that there are far too many art fairs coming up, and the thing is that we are bombarded with applications. Please apply for the art fair and so on. And so I find it very, very difficult. Also to select because on the one hand we have the pressure to be at the places where the big fairs are, but we cannot afford to go to the big fairs yet because I have a very small gallery, so the budget is not there. So I have a question for the gallerists. On the one hand, would you recommend me to attend even also small fairs? Or would you say, no, wait until you're able to do a big and important fair? Or, actually also the same question to you. So I think it's very difficult to select because, there's one question also for Victoria. Would you, for the selection of a gallery and participating in Frieze, would you tell the gallery, okay, you have participated in this bad craft fair, so you're not considered to participate in our fair?
That's a good question. I think when you were asking the question, the earlier part of it, I was thinking one thing I think is a really important step for galleries is supporting your local fair. And it sounds as if where you're from, there may not be a fair there specifically, but nearby. I mean, closest city with an art fair. Munich. So, I mean, it's... What I was thinking about is Frieze London when it started. There were a lot of galleries, London galleries, for whom that was the only fair they did for years. That was their, it was their home fair. And being part of your home fair, I think, is an important thing to do. And that sort of showing support to the city that you're in and, building up your local collector base. I think that's the most obvious first thing to do in many ways. And for some people, they think, well, why should I do a fair in my city? I know the collectors there. I should go somewhere else. But I do think it's really, really important to be in your local fair. And then after that, I hand over to it. But I would also say that I don't think a selection committee would ever make a judgment on a gallery for them choosing to do their local fair. I think that's something that is totally understood and encouraged.
Perhaps not their local fair, but what about some fairs I will not name that might put a bit of a black mark against?
I mean, if they're in the fair and they're doing a great stand, I mean, I would say selection committees, and I've sat through many, many selection committee meetings, what they're mainly looking at is the programme of the gallery. We're not that interested in what other fairs people do. And I mean, it's interesting to see what other fairs they choose to do, but it's not going to be the decision maker really. It's much more about the artists they're showing and the program in the gallery itself. And that should be the absolute focus for a young gallery, I would say. It's, focus on your program. Because that's what people will judge you by more than anything else.
So
and if you
there
have a
was
good
also-
presentation among a number of things which are not so good, it's not a bad way to be seen.
Yes.
I think that's definitely the way to start. Now there's also there's another issue. I mean, there's also an enormous clientele for what we could call bad art. But now
This is true.
Who knows?
It's a
Who
very
says?
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are 20
is
fairs
it?
in Miami in
Exactly.
1 week. Most of them you
Yes.
think we're
You
not
know.
great, but there's
Yeah.
obviously a market.
That's
there.
endless.
Yeah.
And but who, the criteria varies. They change. They change from one category to another. That's it.
And Elba.
Yes,
do you have-
my own policy is to go to the best and the good ones, and it means not only the mayor, but you have liste, you have independent. There are other possibilities of good fairs for younger galleries. But the first thing I recommend is what you say, Victoria. First step is to go to your local or national fair, and you have in Germany Cologne. That this is what I say, because Cologne is a good fair. You can have, if you make a good spot, a lot of visibility, and then to think just to jump to another of the
Absolutely.
younger.
So we had a question there, and then a question here, and then I think there was one over there as well. Yes, there is. Okay, so.
Hi, Lisa Schiff. Sorry. Just to your question, I would say I have started taking clients to smaller fairs in different cities where we'll travel to Mexico City, which is a huge city, but that fair is still quite, it's quite small in the big scheme of things, and we'll go to Berlin for Gallery Weekend. We will travel just to get away from the riffraff of like Miami, which is kind of just too much. So I do think it's good to do smaller fairs.
Oh, thank you.
But I just had
there's a question.
two comments for all of you. One is going back to WME. I just wanted to say, because I've spent a lot of time in Los Angeles and have clients and friends who are involved in the entertainment industry and have been watching. There are three main agencies in Los Angeles. One is CAA, one is UTA, and the other one is WME. And they've all taken great interest in the art world because they're seeing something is happening here, and visual culture is the future and on every level. So they're going beyond just the movie business and sports and whatever and looking. None of them could crack it, and then WME kind of made the brilliant move of getting involved with Frieze. And WME is kind of veered a little bit from just being an agency, but also a media group, and they own all of the fashion weeks. And the reason that this works for WME, as far as I understand, is that they see verticality in Frieze as a company. And so I wonder if you could just comment on that and what you see the future of that being. I mean, I've noticed, and you said you're shutting the VIP room, that a lot of these fairs, and by the way, you guys do the most beautiful installations of like the fair, the architecture is incredible. But the restaurants have gotten fantastic. So it's like there are collectors who go, but then there are just people who are never going to buy art, or maybe they will, but for the most part, they're going to consume the experience of the art fair. And I'm just wondering are they seeing that as a place where they're monetizing, less so than worrying about creating new collectors? And I just wonder if you could comment on that. And my next thing is...
Lisa, maybe, because we have other questions as well, maybe we'll just take that question
It's
first.
just such a good one.
Oh, well,
just
go ahead.
If you could just comment on Art Basel cities.
Okay, great, thank you.
Is this all for me? So on WME, yes, I think the key thing you said there is people come, they might come for the restaurants, they might come for the architecture, they might come for the experience, and maybe they will buy. maybe they will buy. And this is the thing in London and New York. It's full of people who could be buying art who are not buying art yet. And if the restaurants is what gets them to Frieze New York, that's fine by me, as long as they're coming and they're starting to think about it and they're feeling more comfortable in that world and they're looking at more art and they're meeting more galleries. And maybe coming to Frieze gets them then going to Chelsea or the Lower East Side or Brooklyn or wherever at the weekend and visiting galleries and meeting galleries in their spaces and seeing more art. It's all good, you know. I think the experience of the fair has to be really positive for everybody. It has to be positive for the top collectors who need somewhere good to have lunch, otherwise they're going to leave and not come back. And it also has to be good for the people who are just, you know, coming for a day out but who may then become part of the travelling circus, as you beautifully put it. But yeah, that's...
And the second question was Art Basel Cities, their cultural initiative.
Anyone else?
Anybody else want to talk about that? Maybe it's not entirely fair situation, so perhaps we should move on because we have a number of other questions. So maybe I'll take Susan was the next one, and then over there.
Yes, great. Susan Mumford, founder of the Association of Women Art Dealers. And the question is twofold. I'm afraid, Victoria, somewhat directed at yourself.
Quickly,
yes,
Susan.
If they go together.
Yeah.
One is that I've seen a response by many gallerists, perhaps in their first 10 years particularly, who are developing multiple brands so that they can get into fairs that are more prestigious. It's also the only way for them to viably reducing risk, be able to take that risk of doing some of the more prestigious fairs. So I'm interested in your take on that approach, which we do see. And one gallerist who I personally know says that he or she, not giving away the gender, would like to be the first gallery to exhibit at Frieze who also shows at the Affordable Art Fair. And I'm interested in knowing that response. Thanks.
The second question, I mean, if they apply, they'd be judged on their program. And if they're good enough to get in Frieze, they would get in. It's that simple, I guess. And as I said before, we're not really looking at what other art fairs people do. It's not so interesting. It's much more about what they're doing as a gallery, in their gallery, with their program. I'd be interested to see it. On the first question, I hadn't come across people setting up different strands of their gallery to get into fairs. I'm not sure why they would need to, but I'd be curious to know more about it. But again, if the entity that they were applying with had a great gallery program, that's what they're going to be judged on. There's no issue with what else they're also doing on the side, I guess, as long as there's not a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, perhaps that's something that you could, because we have a question at the back here. Here we go, yes.
Hello, this is Anya from Serbia again. I'm going to take you back to East Europe, sorry. Well, Tadeusz mentioned about the group from Cluj. That was kind of like a common initiative, many people. And this is something that's been happening in East Europe, that, you know, at the lack of galleries and at the lack of a market, people tend to kind of get together and try to make some action together. And I know that there's an artist-run space that got to the Vienna Art Fair like this. So if, let's say, they actually find the funds to apply to the youngest section of Frieze, frame, right? Through maybe like a private donor, or I don't know. Could this be a possibility, or does it have to be a gallery? But could like an artist organization manage to make it, and then from there get exposure and maybe actually get a gallery to represent them, or to...
we have had situations like this before. I think Vitamin Space, when they originally, from Beijing, when they originally joined the fair, were not a commercial gallery. But they were doing extremely interesting things. They had a program of exhibitions. They were working closely with artists, so they kind of mimicked the gallery structure, I suppose. And they did. Frieze was the first fair they ever did. They did that for a few years in London before trying anything else. So it's not unheard of, and especially in a system or in a part of the world where if there are not commercial galleries, then if this is the most interesting thing, then we'd still be interested in representing it, I guess. We do also, I should say, we do have stands for non-profit galleries in the fairs as well. So we give free booths to non-profit galleries from the cities that we're in. And actually, Vitamin had free. We gave them free space initially in the fair. That's how they came into Frieze in the first place. So it's not unprecedented.
Thank you. I'm sorry we're going to have to close. It was such an interesting discussion. And you can, of course, continue over lunch. So I'd like to thank very much Victoria, John, and Elba for coming and sharing these experiences and talking about art fairs.
Hello.